I want you to picture something. It's Cairo, late August 1999. The heat is just suffocating. You're on a street corner and it is absolute chaos.
Total gridlock. That sounds about right.
Right. You've got taxis, donkey carts, people weaving everywhere, horns blaring. It's loud, dusty, and you feel like you can't move.
A pretty standard afternoon in Cairo.
Exactly. But then all of a sudden, this sea of cars just parts, and through the gap comes this enormous, dark green Ford Expedition. It's a tank.
So out of place.
Totally. And the author of our source material, Stephen Cook, he's there, he gets in, and the driver is this wealthy elite guy he calls Hassan. Cook asks him, why on earth did you buy this thing for these tiny streets? And Hassan just laughs. He says, I bought it to scare people away.
And that's it, isn't it? That anecdote says everything. It's not about the car. It's a bubble.
A physical barrier between the rulers and the ruled. And that bubble, that disconnect, is exactly what we're getting into today.
This is a big one.
It is. We are doing a deep dive into The Struggle for Egypt by Stephen A. Cook. And look, I think for most of us, Egypt is, pyramids, King Tut, maybe a Nile cruise.
Sure, ancient history.
But Cook's argument is that it's so much more. He calls Egypt the pivot state.
That's a heavy title, pivot state. But it's dead on. It implies that if Egypt goes, a lot of other things go with it.
The whole region turns on what happens in Cairo. If that pivot point rusts or breaks,
the instability doesn't stay contained, it spills over into Israel, Gaza, Libya, all across the Mediterranean. It's a regional anchor.
So our mission today is to figure out how that pivot got so rusty. We're going to trace it back to one single moment in 1952 that honestly set the stage for everything we see now.
Where we're going to find this constant tension, the tension between the world needing Egypt to be secure and stable and the Egyptian people needing it to be prosperous and free.
And those two things have rarely lined up. So let's get into it. To understand the Egypt of today, we have to go back to what Cook calls the original sin, July 23, 1952.
The Free Officers' Coup. This is the moment the timeline splits. You have Gamal Abdel Nasser and Anwar Sadat, names we all know. They lead a military overthrow of the king.
But why then? I mean, what was the trigger? Was it just pure ambition?
Oh, it was much deeper than that. The core driver was humiliation. You really can't understand the Egyptian military's mindset without understanding the 1948 war.
Against the new state of Israel.
Right. And it was a disaster for the Arab armies, a total rout. And the officers, they didn't blame themselves. They blamed the king, they blamed the British, they blamed corruption.
There's that story about them being sent to fight with defective weapons.
Exactly. The narrative was we were betrayed, we didn't lose, we were sent to die by a corrupt palace. So for them, the 52 coup wasn't just a power grab.
It was a redemption arc.
It was about restoring dignity to the nation and, maybe more importantly, to the army.
There's this incredible detail in the book. When Sadat goes on the radio to announce it all, the whole statement is just 187 words long.
That's it. 187 words to change the entire Middle East. He promised to clean up the country. And the people, well, they cheered. They were sick of the old system.
But that's the trap, isn't it? Cleaning up isn't really a long-term plan for governing.
That is the tragedy of it all. They knew what they were against, imperialism, corruption, all of it. But they never really agreed on what they were for. There was no shared ideology.
So how do you run a country without a unifying idea?
You use what Cook calls coercion and bribery, sticks and carrots. And they built this system, a constituency for autocracy.
A constituency for autocracy. Okay, break that down. Who's in the club?
It's the people whose own survival depends on the regime's survival. So the military, first and foremost, then the intelligence services, parts of the judiciary, and eventually the big business cronies.
The guys in the Ford Expedition.
The Hassans of the world, exactly. As long as that group is happy and protected, the regime feels secure.
And what about everyone else, the other 99%?
They get the coercion. They get the police state. If you're not in the constituency, you're a problem to be managed.
Which, okay, brings us to why the rest of the world cares so much about this internal setup. It's not just about Egypt. It's about where Egypt is.
It always comes back to the real estate.
We have to talk about the Suez Canal.
The jugular of the global economy. I mean, you can't overstate it.
Cook spends a lot of time on 1956 when Nasser nationalizes the canal. He just takes it from the British and the French.
That was his rock star moment. It was electric. Imagine a leader from the developing world standing up to the old colonial powers and saying, "This is ours now." It made him a god on the Arab street.
But Cook calls the canal a double-edged sword. So I get the upside, the money, the power, the pride. What's the downside?
The downside is that you become too important to be left alone. When you control that waterway, everyone has an opinion on how you run your country.
And sometimes they invade you to enforce that opinion.
Like Britain, France, and Israel did in 1956.
Mm-hmm.
And even today, the players have changed, but the game hasn't. Now it's the United States that's obsessed with the canal.
And why is that specifically?
Access. It's really that simple. All that military aid the U.S. sends to Egypt, it's rent. It pays for the U.S. Navy to be able to move aircraft carriers from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf in days, not weeks.
Logistics win wars.
They do. The operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, that whole supply chain runs straight through Suez. So from the Pentagon's point of view, you need a stable, compliant government in Cairo. Period.
So the West is willing to tolerate the coercion part of the equation?
As long as the ships keep moving and the peace with Israel holds, it's the core of what's called authoritarian stability. A deal with a dictator is better than chaos.
Which brings us to how Egypt sees itself. There's that quote in the book, something like, "We produce the population of one Bahrain every year."
Yes. They see themselves as the big brother of the Arab world, the demographic and cultural heavyweight. If there's a problem in the region, Cairo thinks it should be the one to solve it.
But under Mubarak, Cook points out that this fixer role became less about grand diplomacy and more about intelligence work.
We have to talk about Omar Suleiman, the intelligence chief.
Yeah.
But he was so much more. He was basically the shadow foreign minister.
He handled all the important files.
All the files the West cared about, Gaza's ceasefires between Israel and Hamas. That was Suleiman managing the cold peace with Israel. Suleiman, the Sudan file. Suleiman.
But this creates a really strange dynamic, which Cook calls trilateral logic. Help me unpack that.
It's this idea that the U.S.-Egypt relationship isn't really bilateral. It's a triangle. It's Washington, Cairo, Jerusalem.
So the U.S. only cares about Egypt because Egypt maintains the peace with Israel?
To a very large extent, yes. The military aid is tied to the Camp David Accords. But here's the poison pill for the Egyptian regime. Its own people generally hate that policy. They see the blockade of Gaza, for instance, and they see their government as complicit.
So the very thing that makes the regime valuable to Washington
is the very thing that makes it illegitimate at home. It creates this massive legitimacy gap. They look less like a sovereign Arab power and more like, a hired guard for Western interests.
It's a catch-22. To get the U.S. support they need to stay in power, they have to do things that make their own people despise them.
Which means they need to rely even more on coercion and the police state. It's a doom loop.
Okay, we've talked politics, we've talked geography, but there's one thing that scares Egyptian planners more than anything else.
Water.
The Nile.
The existential threat. If you look at a satellite map of Egypt at night, what do you see?
A bright line of light surrounded by complete darkness.
That's the Nile. And that's it. Almost all of Egypt's water comes from outside its borders. The river flows south to north. That makes Egypt, in the book's words, the downstream hostage.
Downstream hostage? That's a terrifying phrase.
I mean, you have almost no control over your own lifeline. And this explains so much of Egypt's foreign policy that seems weird otherwise. Their obsession with what happens in Ethiopia and Sudan.
With the dams.
Especially with the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. If someone upstream decides to turn down the tap, what can you do? This is why Mubarak protected the Sudanese dictator Omar Bashir from international courts.
I never understood that. Bashir was an Islamist. Mubarak hated Islamists. It made no sense.
Ideologically, no. But hydrologically, it makes perfect sense. Mubarak needed a friendly, or at least dependent, government in Khartoum that wouldn't mess with the river. He put water security above everything else.
So let's bring this all together. We have a military regime that survives by filling stability and leveraging the Suez Canal and is deeply paranoid about its water supply. But what about the actual people?
Yeah, the people Hassan was trying to scare away.
Yeah.
This is where Cook's analysis gets really powerful. He contrasts two places, a mall called City Stars and a slum called Duaika.
City Stars is the bubble.
It's the bubble. It's a huge air-conditioned mall with luxury brands. It could be in Dubai or Dallas. It's where the constituency hangs out.
And Duaika.
Duaika is the reality for millions. An unplanned, informal neighborhood. Often no reliable water, no sanitation, just people crammed together. It is the physical proof of state failure.
But here's the thing that's so ironic. The U.S. has poured billions of dollars in aid into Egypt. And not just for tanks, right? For wheat, for infrastructure, for sewage systems.
You'd think that would buy some goodwill.
You'd think. But Cook says it did the opposite. It actually bred resentment.
And this was the real aha moment for me. People aren't stupid. They knew exactly what that aid was. It wasn't a gift. It was a payment.
That's funny.
It was a bribe to the regime to maintain the unpopular peace with Israel and keep the dictator in power. So every new sewer pipe was just a reminder of the deal that kept them oppressed.
So the rich got richer and bought their SUVs, and the poor just got angrier.
And the whole time, the regime was telling the West, don't worry, it's all under control. We're the pivot state. We're the stabilizer. Too big to fail.
Until they weren't.
Until 2011. And Tahrir Square.
And based on everything we've just laid out, that revolution makes so much more sense. It wasn't just people saying, we don't like President Mubarak.
Well, no, Mubarak was just the face of it. It was a rejection of the entire political order that was born in 1952. It was a revolt against the coercion, against the trilateral logic, against the economic inequality of city stars and Duaika.
It was an attempt to finally answer that question. Who gets to define what Egypt is?
Exactly. Is Egypt defined by its generals, by its importance to Washington, or by the millions of people living along that river? Cook's point is that until that question is settled, the struggle continues.
It brings us right back to the beginning, the pivot state.
And a pivot point can break under too much pressure.
And that's the thought I want to leave everyone with. If Egypt is the state that holds the region together, what happens to the region if the pivot itself breaks?
There is no backup plan for the Middle East.
Which leaves us with the big question, right? Can Egypt ever figure out how to translate its strategic importance, that canal, that location, into actual widespread prosperity for its people instead of just leverage for its rulers?
That is the fundamental challenge, because until they do, the stability that everyone relies on is really just an illusion.
A heavy thought to end on. Thanks for walking us through all this. It's complex, but vital to understand.
My pleasure. It's an important story.
And to all of you listening, next time you see a headline about Egypt, remember Hassan's SUV, remember the river, remember the history driving the whole thing. We'll see you in the next deep dive.